The light was going out of the sky the color of a bruise when I first put my hand flat against that cellar door, and I want you to understand what my palm felt before I understood it with my head. Fresh wood, split maybe 6 weeks back, still faintly sticky with sap under the grime, braced crossways over a door frame that had otherwise gone soft and silver with 10 years of weather. Everything else about that homestead was dying the slow, patient way wood dies in eastern Kentucky. The porch boards spongy, the shakes on the roof curled up like old leaves, the one window facing the hollow gone milky and cracked in its frame. A place a blind man had walked away from, or been carried away from, and never come back to. But this door, somebody had cut and set that brace with care, and not long before we came walking up Sable Creek with everything we owned on our backs. My brother stood a step behind me with the lantern, not saying anything, which was his way when something didn't sit right with him. Amos doesn't talk when he's thinking. He gets still, the way a dog gets still before it barks. I've known that stillness my whole life, and I've learned to respect it, same as I'd respect a rattler coiled in tall grass. Not from fear exactly, but because it usually meant something worth paying attention to was fixing to happen. "Somebody's been here," I said, mostly to hear a voice in that quiet, because the hollow that evening was the kind of quiet that makes a man's own thoughts sound loud. "Somebody's been here recent," Amos said, and that was the difference that mattered. We'd bought that 40 acres and the cabin standing on it 3 days earlier, on a Saturday, for $11.50, off the courthouse steps in Corbin's Gap, while half the county stood around laughing at us for doing it. I'll tell you about that laughing directly, about the auctioneer and what he called it in front of near 100 people, and about the old blind man who'd owned the place and died with nothing to his name, or so everyone in 3 counties believed. I'll tell you how we came to have $11 in the first place, which wasn't much, and how we came to spend nearly all of it on a rock pile in a hollow nobody else wanted. But right then, standing in front of that barred door with the last of the light dying behind the ridge and an axe in my brother's other hand, none of that history mattered yet. What mattered was the timber, fresh cut, barred from the inside. A door doesn't bar itself, and a man who'd been dead, or gone, for as long as folks said Eli Tanner had been, shouldn't have had a hand left in this world to bar anything at all. Amos didn't move on the door yet. He just stood there a moment with the axe hanging loose, and I felt the whole 3 days settle back on me like a wet coat. Saturday had come up cold and bright, the kind of October morning where the frost burns off by 9 and the whole square smells like wood smoke and horse. We'd walked in from the Hazard Road with $11.50 between us, folded twice inside Amos's boot, which was the entire sum of what we owned in the world, besides a rifle, a hand axe, 2 blankets, and each other. That $11.50 was 3 months of split rail fencing and 1 bad week hauling ore sacks for a man who shorted us on the last load. We hadn't come to Corbin's Gap looking to buy land. We'd come because somebody said the courthouse steps drew a crowd on auction Saturdays, and a crowd sometimes meant work. Instead, we got Pruitt Hollis standing up on a nail keg with a ledger in one hand and a look on his face like he already knew how the joke would land before he told it. "Estate of Eli Tanner," he called out, 40 acres on Sable Creek, 1 cabin standing, 1 root cellar, and whatever fool notions the man died with. "Who'll open me at $2? Somebody laughed before he even finished. Turned out near everybody in 3 counties knew Tanner. Blind these last 10 years or better, widower even longer than that, a man who'd gone quiet and strange up his hollow and hadn't been seen at the mill or the church in longer than most could remember, died sometime that spring. They said, though nobody had actually laid eyes on the body, just word passed down from a trapper who'd found the place empty and the fire long cold. Amos bid $2 just to see what would happen. Hollis laughed along with the crowd, called it charity bidding, said we ought to save our money for something with a roof that didn't leak. Bid climbed slow and mean after that, mostly other men bidding just to needle us, driving the price up out of meanness more than want, until it landed on $11.50, and nobody wanted to go higher over a dead blind man's rock pile. "Sold," Hollis said, to the Pruitt boys, for $11.50, and God help them. That's when the whole crowd went up laughing proper, near 100 people by my count, wiping their eyes over it. $10 for a dead blind man's rock pile, he kept saying to whoever'd listen, all afternoon, like it was the finest joke Corbin's Gap had heard all year. We didn't laugh, we didn't have anything else to spend it on, and a cabin was a cabin, roof or no roof. Now here we were 3 days later, 6 miles up that same hollow, and the roof was the least strange thing about the place. The walk up took the better part of 2 hours, longer than it should have on account of the mule balking twice at the creek crossings, and I didn't mind the extra time because it gave me a chance to look at the country proper. Late October in that part of Kentucky smells like nothing else I've come across since. Wet leaf mold turning black under your boots, wood smoke drifting down from some cabin you can't see, the sharp cold iron smell that means frost's coming before dark. The hollow narrowed as we climbed, hemmed in tight by ridges gone red and gold and rust-colored, sycamores dropping their leaves onto Sable Creek, where it ran shallow and loud over limestone shelves. Amos walked ahead with the mule's lead rope wrapped twice around his fist, not saying much, same as always, and I walked behind, trying to keep my thoughts off my own tongue and failing. $11.50, I said, not for the first time that day. I heard the number the first time you said it, Daniel. I'm not complaining on the price. I'm saying it don't square. A man works land for what, 30 years, and it goes for less than a good mule? Amos didn't answer that one. He never did care much for a question without an answer sitting right behind it, and I'll admit I've always been the opposite. I'll chase a question a mile past where it's worth chasing, just to see where it leads. Something about the whole business at the courthouse had been sitting wrong in me since Hollis said his piece, and it wasn't the laughing that bothered me. Men'll laugh at anything if enough of them get started at once. It was the particular way he'd said it, penniless, like he knew that for a fact and not just a guess, like it was something the whole town had settled on years back and stopped discussing. Nobody in that crowd had asked a single question about the place. Nobody'd bid it up out of curiosity, only out of meanness, which told me the meanness had a history to it I didn't have yet. The elevation climbed with us, maybe 1,800 feet by the time the trees opened up, and the air had that thin, clean bite you get in the hill country once you're up off the valley floor. A hawk went over, quiet, riding some current we couldn't feel down where we were. I counted 3 old fence posts, leaning, wire long since rusted through and fallen. Somebody had built here once with the notion of staying. You ever hear anybody say his name before today? I asked. Before the auction, I mean. Tanner. Eli Tanner. Amos thought on it a while, which for him was as good as saying no outright. Man goes blind, he said finally. Folks stop seeing him too. That's usually the way of it. I didn't have an answer for that, and it seemed a decent enough one, but it didn't sit right either. Because if a man had gone that invisible, that forgotten, why did half of Corbin's Gap seem to know exactly how poor he'd died? The cabin showed itself the way most of them do up in that country, sudden, through a break in the sycamores, sitting low against the hillside like it was trying not to be noticed. One story, maybe 18 by 20 feet, chinking gone gray and crumbled in patches, roof shakes curled up at the edges from 30 seasons of sun and snow. A porch that had lost its railing, no smoke, no stalk, no sound but the creek running somewhere behind it, and a woodpecker working a snag off in the trees. We stood a minute before either of us went up the steps. That's a thing you learn on the trail. A place empty that long has its own kind of held breath, and you don't want to be the one that breaks it careless. Inside was about what I expected, and then some worse. Bare puncheon floor, swept clean by wind coming through a window with no glass left in it. A cold hearth, ash long since scattered. No table, no chair, no bed frame. Whatever furniture the man had owned, scavengers or kin, or just passing strangers had carried off years back, the way folks do with anything left standing. Once word gets around, nobody's coming to claim it. There was a peg on the wall where a coat might have hung once. That was the only sign a man had lived there at all. Stripped clean, Amos said, and there wasn't much feeling in it. We'd seen worse. We'd seen cabins with the roof caved clean through and bones inside that used to be somebody's dog. It was Amos who found the root cellar door, out back, cut into the hillside the way they do it, so the earth itself holds the cold. A low door, maybe 4 foot high, set into a stone foundation half buried in leaf rot. I near walked past it. He tried the handle first, easy, the way you'd test anything that old. It didn't give an inch. Latched, he said. From outside? He crouched, ran a hand along the seam. No, from in. That stopped us both a second. A door barred from the inside means somebody was on the inside to bar it, and last I checked, most men don't wall themselves into their own root cellar and then go on and die somewhere else 10 years later. Amos got down closer, squinting at the wood where the crossbar showed through a gap at the jamb. Look at the grain on that, he said, and I did, and even I could see it. The bar itself wasn't gray and split, like everything else on this place. It was pale, fresh cut, or fresh enough, no decade of weather on it. Everything else out here's rotted to nothing, I said, and this is the one board somebody thought worth replacing. Amos didn't answer that right off. He just stood there looking at that door like it had said something to him personal, and behind us the creek kept on running, and the hawk from before, or one just like it, crossed silent over the ridgeline above the hollow. We didn't have a key, and there wasn't a soul left alive to ask for one, so Amos went and got the axe off his pack and set to the hinge side instead of the bar, figuring iron would give before that fresh-cut pine did. Took him the better part of 20 minutes, swinging careful in that low light, me holding the lantern we'd found hanging dead and dry in the barn and refilled from our own oil. Every strike echoed down into the hill like the whole hollow was hollow itself. When the last hinge finally sheared, the door didn't fall so much as lean, tired, and Amos had to put his shoulder into it to walk it sideways out of the frame. Cold air came up out of that cellar first, colder than the October evening around us, and it smelled of earth and vinegar and something else underneath, waxy and close. Amos went down the 4 dirt steps ahead of me with the lantern held out front, and I came behind, and what we found wasn't nothing like what a barred door had promised. Shelves. Plain dug shelves cut into the earth walls, and on them jars, rows of them, glass gone a little cloudy with age but still sealed, beans, pickled pork gone pale in their brine, apples sliced and packed tight. A blind man's larder, put up the same as any woman's kitchen shelf, and for a second I felt almost let down, like we'd broken a man's last door for a wall of preserves. There's food enough here for a winter, I said, and my voice came out smaller than I meant in that dirt room. Amos didn't answer. He was moving along the far wall slow, lantern light sliding over jar after jar, and he stopped at the last shelf on the left, the one set back nearest the corner. He set the lantern down on the dirt floor and put both hands flat against the shelf boards and pushed, and I watched his shoulders change, the way a man's shoulders change when something gives that oughtn't to. Feel here, he said, and I came and put my own hand where his had been, right along the back edge where the shelf met the wall. Every other shelf in that cellar sat snug against packed earth, solid, no play in it at all. This one rocked, just barely, a half-inch of give at the back like it wasn't earth behind it at all, but something hollow. Amos, I said. I know it, he said, and he was already working his fingers along the underside, hunting for whatever held it in place. And neither one of us said another word for a good while, just the lantern hissing low and that shelf creaking soft under his hands, like it had been waiting 10 years for somebody to ask it to move. Amos found the catch low, where the shelf met the floorboard, a wooden pin no bigger than my thumb, driven through a hole somebody had bored smooth as anything I'd seen. He worked it loose with his knife, and the whole shelf came away from the wall in one piece, jars and all, swinging on a hinge of leather strap he'd nailed into the frame himself. Behind it wasn't earth. Behind it was black space, cool air, moving out of it slow, smelling of pine shavings and linseed oil instead of dirt and vinegar. He picked the lantern back up, and neither of us said a thing about who was going first. We just went together, shoulder to shoulder, ducking under a header beam he'd shored up with a length of hewn oak. The chamber ran maybe 10 feet back, dug square, walls braced with timber, the same way the cellar door had been. Fresh work laid over old ground. A workbench sat against the far wall, low and solid, its top worn to a shine in a curve that matched a man's reach, arm length in every direction, like he'd stood in one spot for 10 years and never needed to move his feet. Tools hung above it on pegs, chisels and gouges and a spoke shave, every handle worn dark and smooth where a palm had gripped it 10,000 times over. And then the furniture. Chairs, 4 of them, ladder-backed, joints so tight I couldn't find the seam with my fingernail. A cradle, rockers curved like they'd been steamed and bent by somebody who could see the line he wanted. A trunk with a lid that closed without a gap anywhere around it. A hope chest, carved along the front edge with a running vine, leaves overlapping leaf over leaf, no two exactly the same, and none of them wrong. He couldn't see any of this, I said, and I heard my own voice come out thin. Amos ran his hand along the cradle rail, slow, the way you'd touch something in a church. He didn't need to see it, he said. He built it by feel. Every piece of it. I thought about that a long moment, standing in a hole in the ground, 6 miles up a hollow, lantern light shaking on 12 pieces of furniture, built in the dark by a man who'd been in the dark his whole last decade of life. Every joint measured by thumb and knuckle, every curve shaped by a hand that knew wood the way other men know faces. 10 years, Amos said, quiet, mostly to himself. Man spent 10 years down here. I didn't answer him. I was looking at the hope chest, at that carved vine running the length of it, and I was already wondering, the way I couldn't help but wonder about anything with a shape and a purpose, what in the Lord's name a blind man with no family left had been building all this for. Amos found it before I did. He'd moved past the hope chest to the workbench, running his hand along the underside where the wood met a shelf lip, and his fingers caught on something that wasn't wood at all, a book, wrapped in oilcloth, tied with a leather cord gone stiff with age. He worked the knot loose with his thumbnail and set the cloth back like it was a bandage he didn't want to tear. It was a ledger, the kind you'd buy at any dry goods counter for 30 cents, but the hand that filled it changed partway through. The first few pages were cramped and careful, a schoolboy's hand, dated as far back as the spring of 1861. Then, maybe a third of the way in, the writing shifted, looser, more confident, and signed at the bottom of that first changed page. Written for E. Tanner by W. Coy, neighbor, since his eyes have gone from him. I read it aloud because Amos can't read fast, and this wasn't a night for slow reading. It went on for pages, mostly numbers. $2 from selling a hog, $4.10 from a man in Manchester who wanted a chest of drawers, 6 months of nothing when the winter was hard. But under the numbers, in Coy's looser hand, were the words that weren't numbers at all. Says he means this for Sarah, when she's grown. Says a girl ought to have something set by that nobody can take from her. Further down, another entry, this one dated years later. Told me today his boy Josiah is 3 years in the ground now, out west somewheres near the Platte, and he don't rightly know what become of the wife or the child after, only that the girl's name was Sarah, and she'd have gone to kin. Says he writes her name so he don't forget the shape of it, though he can't see the letters no more than he could before. I stopped reading. The lantern popped once, low on oil, and neither of us moved to trim it. He never met her, I said. Don't sound like it, Amos said. 10 years of saving for a girl he never laid eyes on. Didn't even know for certain she was alive. Amos didn't answer that. He was looking at the 4 pieces we hadn't opened yet, the trunk, the second chair, the small hope chest, a low table with turned legs, and I understood without him saying it that we were both thinking the same fool thought, that somewhere in that hollowed wood was more than furniture, that a blind man who'd buried 10 years in a hole under his own floor hadn't done it for nothing. I turned another page. The last entry Coy had written was dated less than a year back, the letters shakier than the rest, like the neighbor's own hand had started failing him too. He asked me today if I thought a person could love somebody they never met. I told him I didn't rightly know. He said he reckoned he'd find out. I closed the ledger and set it on the workbench, careful, like it might crumble if I breathed wrong on it. Amos was already up, running his hand along the low table with the turned legs, the way he'd run his hand along a horse's leg looking for heat and swelling. He found it quick. A seam in the wood, hairline, right where the leg met the apron, filled with something that wasn't quite the same color as the rest. "Give me the hatchet," he said. I did, and he worked it slow, prying rather than chopping, and the leg came apart along a joint that had been cut clean and glued back so careful you'd never have known it wasn't solid unless you were looking. Inside, wrapped in a scrap of oilcloth gone stiff with age, was coin. Gold and silver both, eagles and half-dollars, more than either of us had held at one time in our lives. Neither of us said anything for a good long while. Amos turned the leg over in his hands like it might tell him something the ledger hadn't. We found the same in the second chair, and in the hope chest's base, and in one leg of the trunk, 4 hiding places in all, and when we'd laid it out on the bench and counted it twice because neither of us trusted the first count, it came to $340. "Lord," I said, and it wasn't cussing, it was closer to a prayer. Amos didn't touch it again after the counting. He stood back from the bench with his arms crossed like the money had done something to offend him. "We bought the place," I said. "Bought it fair. $11.50 at auction. Nobody forced it on Hollis. Nobody forced it on the county. It's ours, same as the cabin's ours. Don't feel the same as the cabin. Money's money. This ain't money. This ain't money. This is 10 years of a blind man cutting his own hands open in the dark for a girl he never met." Amos said it flat, not arguing, just laying the fact down between us like he was setting a plank. "We didn't buy that. Hollis didn't sell that. Wasn't in the estate description, and wasn't in anybody's mind when the gavel came down." I wanted to argue him out of it, because $340 was more than either of us had ever seen, and I could feel my own want working on me quiet, the way hunger works on a man who tells himself he isn't hungry. But I looked at the ledger sitting closed on the bench, at Coy's shaking last lines, and I knew Amos was right before I let myself say it out loud. "So what do we do with it?" I said. Amos looked at the money a long moment, then at the door of the chamber, like he could see clean through the hillside to wherever this Sarah was living, 2 counties off, and never told a thing. "Reckon we go find her?" he said. We didn't go anywhere that night. It was too late, and the fire had burned down to coals while we'd been sitting in that dugout chamber, and Amos said a decision made in the dark under a hillside wasn't the same as one made warm and rested. So we hauled the money and the ledger up into the cabin, set them on the table between us, and built the fire back up bigger than we needed, like the light itself might settle something. I couldn't sleep on it, not right off. I lay on my bedroll turning the number over, $340, more than what our father had cleared in any 2 years I could remember, more than what Amos and I together had earned in the 11 months since we'd crossed into Kentucky. I thought about boots that weren't falling apart. I thought about a rifle that wasn't older than both of us put together. I thought about never again standing outside a store window doing arithmetic on beans and salt pork. Amos sat up by the hearth a long while, not sleeping either, turning one of the coins over in his fingers like he was reading something off the face of it that wasn't there. Around midnight I gave up pretending and sat up too. "It'd be easy," I said. "Nobody'd ever know there was a girl at all. Ledger could have burned with the old man's mind, could have meant nothing." "You'd know," Amos said. "I know that." "That's the whole of it, then." He set the coin down on the table, careful, like it might wake something. "Man spends 10 years carving in the dark for somebody he never laid eyes on. You start keeping money like that, Daniel. You don't stop being the kind of man who keeps it. That's not a one-time thing. That's a door, and once it's open, you don't get to shut it again, just 'cause the next time it's harder to swallow." I didn't have an answer for that, not one worth saying out loud. I thought about our father, who never had $2 to rub together his whole life, but never once, that I knew of, took what wasn't rightly his. Not from a neighbor's cellar, not from a dead man's pocket, not from anybody. It hadn't made him rich. It also hadn't made him somebody Amos and I were ashamed to carry the name of. "All right," I said, finally, and it came out quieter than I meant it to, like the words themselves knew what they were giving up. "We find her." Amos nodded once, the way he did when a thing was settled and didn't need saying twice, and banked the fire, and neither one of us slept much anyway, listening to the wind work at the new chinked walls till gray light came up over Sable Creek. We rode into Corbin's Gap on a Tuesday, the 11th of October, with the ledger wrapped in oilcloth in my saddlebag, like it might spoil if the air got to it. The courthouse clerk was a narrow man named Whit Souter, who'd been at his desk so long the wood had worn smooth where his elbows sat, and he didn't look up from his inkpot till Amos said the name Tanner out loud. "Eli Tanner," Souter said, like he was tasting something gone a little sour. "Bought that rock pile off the estate, didn't you? Whole town's still laughing about it." "Let 'em laugh," Amos said. "We need the birth and marriage books. Anything with a Tanner in it, going back 30 years. It took the better part of a day. Souter wasn't unkind about it once he saw we were serious. He hauled down ledgers thick with dust and let us sit at a side table while the light moved across the floor and then climbed the far wall. We found the son first, a William Tanner, married in 1846 to a Corbin's Gap girl named Ruth Ashby, and a birth entry under it, faint, half-blotted, a daughter, Sarah Ashby Tanner, born March of 1849. No death recorded for William in the county books. Amos said that fit, if he'd died on the march west or somewhere out past the county line, the way so many men did in those years, and nobody thought to write it down anywhere but a stone, if there was even a stone. After that, the trail went thin. Souter remembered, or half-remembered, that the Ashby kin had moved off toward Big Laurel sometime in the 50s, and he sent us across the road to the trading post, where a ledger of freight and mail going back years sat behind the counter like nobody had thought to burn it. It took another hour of squinting at a storekeeper's cramped hand before Amos's finger stopped on a line from 1868. Goods shipped to a S. Tanner, Big Laurel, care of a dry goods store there. Seamstress work noted alongside it in a different ink, like somebody'd added it later for their own bookkeeping. 2 counties over, Amos said, and I could hear him doing the miles in his head, the way he always did, quiet, like he was carrying something heavy across a room without wanting me to see the weight of it. We left the ledgers where we'd found them and thanked Souter, who watched us go, with an expression I couldn't read, something between pity and curiosity. And outside the courthouse the afternoon had gone gray and close, smelling of rain that hadn't decided yet whether it meant to fall. Amos checked the cinch on his horse without needing to. I stood there with the oilcloth bundle against my chest and thought about a woman 2 counties away who sewed hems for a living and had no idea a blind man had spent 10 years thinking about her. Big Laurel took us 2 days on muddy roads, the chair lashed across my saddle in a horse blanket, and by the time we found the dry goods store, the woman behind the counter pointed us down an alley to a narrow door with a hand-lettered sign, S. Tanner, Seamstress. My hands weren't steady on the reins going down there. She was younger than I'd pictured, dark hair pinned back, a mouth full of pins she took out one at a time when we came through her door, a length of blue calico still draped across her knee. She looked at 2 dust-covered strangers carrying a chair between them like it was a coffin and didn't say anything at first, just watched us set it down careful on her floor. "We knew your grandfather," Amos said. "Not knew him well. Not knew him at all, really, but it was the truest short thing he could say." She said she didn't have a grandfather, not one anybody'd ever named for her. Her mother's father had died before she was born, that was the family word on it, and she'd never once heard different. Amos set the ledger on her work table and stepped back like he didn't want to be standing too close when she opened it. She read slow. I watched her finger stop on the same line I'd stopped on, that word Sarah, written over and over in a neighbor's careful hand across 10 years of entries, dollar amounts, small ones, a hen sold, a hog sold, coins set aside. She didn't cry right away. She went to the chair instead, knelt down in her good dress on the dusty floor, and ran her palm along the joint where the arm met the seat, the place where a blind man's fingers had fitted 2 pieces of wood together by feel alone until they didn't need glue to hold, only patience. "He never met me," she said, not a question. Just something she needed to say out loud to make it real. "No, ma'am," I said. She found the seam where the leg had been hollowed and refilled. The wood grain matched so close you'd never know unless you were looking, and I saw her understand it the way we had. That money hidden, that careful, wasn't hidden from thieves. It was hidden the way a man tucks something inside his coat before he hands it to somebody he loves, so it doesn't fall out along the way. Amos set the coin sack on the table next to the ledger. $340, gold and silver both, the whole weight of it landing soft against the wood. She looked at the money a long moment. Then she looked at the chair. We didn't stay for her tears. Some things a man ought not watch, even a stranger's. So we took our hats and went out to see to the horses, and gave her the room to sit with what she'd been handed. When we came back in, she'd wiped her face and put the kettle on, and she thanked us plain, the way you thank somebody for passing the salt, because there wasn't a bigger word that fit what she meant. Word travels slow in that country, but it travels sure. By the second week of November, Corbin's Gap had the whole of it, the barred door, the false shelf, the 10 years of carving in the dark, the granddaughter in Big Laurel who never knew she had a name waiting for her. Pruitt Hollis didn't say much about it. Not that I heard, but he stopped telling the joke about the rock pile. Men who'd laughed loudest on the courthouse steps started nodding to us on the road instead, and one of them, old Ambrose Kettle who ran the feed store, wouldn't take our money for a sack of cornmeal that December, said we'd already paid enough for 1 year. We spent that winter setting the cabin right. New chinking in the walls, a patched roof, the root cellar cleared out and put back to its plain use. Jars of beans and apples, nothing hidden beneath them anymore. Amos built a bed frame from the leftover lumber, and I split more cordwood than I care to remember, and by the time the snow came we had a home instead of a rock pile, which was more than either of us figured on when we'd handed over $11.50 in front of a laughing crowd. Come spring, a letter arrived by way of the Big Laurel post-rider. Sarah's hand was neat, practiced from her needlework, and she wrote that the chair sat by her window now, that she thought of the old man some evenings, a grandfather she'd never touched who'd thought of her every day for 10 years, with nothing but wood and coin to say it. She thanked us again, and asked God to keep us, and I folded that letter and kept it in my coat a long while after. I think about that cellar door sometimes, barred from the inside with green timber, while everything else on that place was rotting to nothing. A man built that door to keep something safe long after he was gone, and we were the ones who happened to be walking by when it mattered. We didn't get rich that year. We got a cabin, 40 acres, and a lesson about what a man can build with nothing but time and love for somebody he'll never see. If you've got a brother, hold on to him, and if you've got a story like ours, tell it below. We'd like to hear it. Subscribe if you want to keep walking these hills with us.